Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher. Nobody liked Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher. For one thing, he had too many titles. The Germans loved their titles. Because he was a man, you had to call him Herr, the German word for Mr. Because he was a teacher, you had to call him Professor. Because he had a doctorate from Heidelberg University, you had to call him Doctor. And because he'd been a major in the German army, you had to call him Major. Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher. It took so long to ask him if you could go to the bathroom, you could wet yourself. We should have just been glad he didn't have 2 doctorates. Then we would have had to call him Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher. Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher was old and wrinkly, with a bristly white mustache you could have used as a horse brush, and a liver spot the shape of Czechoslovakia on his forehead. He used to be a college professor until all the college-age students were sent off to the war, and he was super mad about it and never let us forget it. The only reason anybody put up with him at all was because he'd fought in the First World War, and fighting was all about all anybody in Germany respected anymore. I was surprised he wore a brown woolen suit and tie instead of his old uniform and pointy helmet. Even though I wasn't his biggest fan, I had a soft spot for the old codger. I'd gotten the impression he didn't love the Nazis. It was nothing Melcher had said or done. Anything that explicit would have gotten him hauled off to a concentration camp or re-enlisted in the army, even though he was too old to fight again. It was just the way he talked so lovingly about the way things used to be. I felt he was a kindred spirit, a fellow faker. It's already enough that I waste my time on your ignoramuses when I should be teaching at the university, Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher told us. Sit down and shut up, all of you. Before you take your math tests, I have 2 items you will no doubt consider to be good news. The first, as you may have heard, is that the Führer has announced that Berlin is now officially Jew-free. There were smiles and clapping all around. I gave a fake little smile to mask my disapproval as Fritz, the new boy, turned to nod and grin at me. The Germans had been carting the Jews away to concentration camps all over Germany ever since the night of broken glass, and now, according to Herr Maggot Hitler, they were gone from his capital city. The second, Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher said, is that the decision has been made to call up all 17-year-old Hitler Youth members directly into the German army. The room erupted in excited conversation. 17-year-olds fighting in the army? For the German government to call up senior Hitler Youth members to the army was one thing. To announce that they would be skipping the usual year of service working on farms in the countryside was even more extraordinary. That meant the Nazis were drafting boys just 4 years older than all of us straight to the front lines. And I knew why. The rest of the boys in the class only got the news the German government gave them. But my family and I had a radio that could pick up the BBC news service from London. The truth was, the German 6th Army had just been forced to surrender to the Russians at Stalingrad after a 6-month siege, a loss of more than 285,000 German soldiers. German radio was still listing the names of the tens of thousands of soldiers who died before the surrender. The Nazis were scrambling, trying to build their numbers back up after their disaster on the Eastern Front. The BBC News called it a turning point in the war, a shift in the favor of the English, American, and Russian allies. For the first time in the war, the Nazis were on the ropes. I let myself smile about it, while everyone else thought I was smiling about getting to fight for the Nazis sooner. As a result of the senior Hitler Youth members being called into active duty, the age for graduation for the young folk to the Hitler Youth proper is now 13, not 14, Herr Professor Dr. Major Melcher told us, which means all of you little brats are moving up into the regular Hitler Youth a year earlier than you thought. Next week, in fact.